What's going on, guys? Alpha the Wizard back at it with another video. Today we are continuing the meta history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And we have just passed Dark Arm return format with the E-ban of Dimension Fusion, return from the different dimension going to 1 in May of 2008. And immediately after this, Gladiator Beast quickly rose to become the best deck. However, there was a nice innovating strategy that former pro player Adam Korn brought to a Shonen Jump. And this deck was different than Glad's. It was different than any Dark Arm return deck of any variation after the emergency banning. This deck was Prime Material Monarchs. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and hop right in and show you exactly what this deck was all about. So starting off with the boss monster, we have two Prime Material Dragons. This card was really good, and it was also a good counter to the Gladiator Beast strategy, which quickly rose in popularity after Dark Arm Return kind of got nerfed. And this is a Monarch deck, so we do play the new edition Caius, which this card was a new Monarch around this time. However, didn't see too much play when it first came out, mainly because Dark Arm Return didn't really need Caius, but also Caius, Monarch decks just kind of fell off the face of the map when Dark Arm Dragon came out, and yeah, quickly warped the format. But then we also have Thestalos. Now, this was a very much so just a control-oriented deck, and Thestalos was another good Monarch, and it was a good way to eliminate some of the potential Gladiator Beasts that might have been in the hand. And then we do have a singular copy of Ryza. Ryza is probably, between him and Caius, one of the best Monarchs in the entire deck, but this was also important because you could spin a card like maybe Royal Oppression, or you could just, stack one of their back rows, forcing them to commit that right away. So yeah, these are all the boss monsters of the deck, because it is Monarch oriented. And then now for the small monsters, this is where the deck gets interesting. He opted to play 3 copies of Dekoichi, the Battle Locomotive, and he also played 2 copies of Gravekeeper Spy. Now, you may be wondering, why does he only play 2 Spy? Now, this deck didn't necessarily need to rely on Spy. This deck was more so just relying on its trap cards and then just having bodies to be able to tribute from Monarchs. That was the whole point of this deck. And then also just simply being able to recycle cards with a card like Mask of Darkness, because this is a very heavy trap deck. So yeah, traps are basically the core of the strategy with it being a control deck. But then it wouldn't be a control deck if we did not have Morphing Jar. So Morphing Jar was really good in this deck for multiple reasons, because this deck opted to play Reckless Greed, which we will get into here in a bit. But Morphing Jar allowed us to maybe set like a Reckless Greed or 2, and then resolve Morphing Jar, and then resolve maybe a Reckless Greed or 2. So we were able to get so much advantage just based off of all these flip effects. And then we also play a singular copy of Night Assailant. Night Assailant's just generally good because we play so many flip effects. There's not really many discard outlets to maximize his other effect. However, it is just a good removal card. And yeah, so quite a bit of flip effects, but it is very control oriented. Now that's it for all the flip effects. Now for the other cards, the monsters that we opted to play, well, Adam, I should say. A single copy of Sangan. Sangan tutors like any deck or any card that's 1500 or less, which in this deck it's quite a few of power cards. And then 1 singular copy of Spirit Reaper. Now Glad's was able to deal with Reaper relatively easy. However, if you were to play against another matchup other than Glad's this format, they're gonna have trouble outing a Spirit Reaper, and they're gonna have to rely on maybe like their spell or trap cards. So their monsters alone aren't gonna be able to deal with this, thus allowing you to stall by for a few more turns, getting into your power traps, and yeah, or maybe even a Monarch. And then he also opted to play a singular copy, a Cyber Valley. Cyber Valley was just generically good in this deck, just because, like, you know, it is a control deck. So simply just being able to summon a Cyber Valley and set 3 back row and pass was very powerful in this deck, because now they have to waste their battle phase and you get a free draw, and then you're just able to just keep doing a lot of flexing, really. Now on to the spells. This deck is constructed slightly different than the other decks in the format. It did play 2 copies of Allure of Darkness. There's not like an incredible amount of darks, but we do have a fair amount, enough to justify at least playing 2 of these. And then he does play 2 copies of Book of Moon. We have so many good flip effects that Book of Moon, we can just maximize on this. If they declare an attack on like our face-up Dokoichi that we flipped, we can just get like another free draw. And then we do play 2 copies of Soul Exchange. Now this is a Monarch deck, and being able to just tribute one of your opponents like Gladiator Beast, or even, you know, maybe a set monster, is very, very, very strong, especially playing cards like the Stalos. And then a singular copy of Brain Control, for good reason, serves a similar purpose as Soul Exchange. However, the card is at 1, or else we would just play 3 Brain Control. And then a singular copy of Mystical Space Typhoon. Now, Adam did not opt to play Heavy Storm, as I'm sure you've noticed, and for good reason. You don't really need Heavy Storm in this deck, and here's why. I will get to that when I show you the traps, because we play enough back row that we don't need to justify playing Heavy Storm. So yeah, moving on to the core, heart, and soul of this deck, we have 3 copies of Royal Oppression. Now, this was an anti-Gladiator Beast card, and when Lightsworn comes out later in June of 2008, Royal Oppression is also going to be really good against Lightsworn unless they have Lila. But in addition to this, Adam also opted to play 3 copies of Reckless Greed. Now, with this deck having so many flip effects and is very control oriented, it is very common for us to get to 2 copies of Reckless Greed. Now, if we have to flip 1 prematurely, we're usually in a bad spot. Usually we weren't controlling the game, or we just didn't have enough tempo. However, you do usually want to resolve this card in 2s. You want to be able to stack this card upon each other, and yeah, it just makes you for not skipping as many draw phases and just netting you more advantage. But then, in addition to that, it wouldn't be a control trap deck if we didn't play 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. Judgment is just good because it just eliminates the blowout cards like Heavy Storm and, you know, maybe any just power cards that you might be afraid of, depending on what matchup you're playing against. And then he also opted to play just some power traps, battle and, you know, summon traps like Bottomless Trap Hole. And then he played a singular copy of Mirror Force because this card was still at 1. And then last but not least, he played Crush Card Virus and Trap Dust Shoe. How would it be a control deck without Crush Card? And if you look, the amount of monsters that we have for Crush Card are quite a bit. We have Reaper, Sangan, Assailant, Mask of Darkness. Yeah, so, I mean, this deck is pretty nifty, very fun to play, and yeah, if you like control decks, this would definitely be the deck to play this format if you're not a fan of Gladiator Beast. But yeah, so this is Prime Material Monarchs in the meta history of Yu-Gi-Oh! I really hope you all enjoyed the content, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode of Meta History of Yu-Gi-Oh!